Welcome to Tenacity with Sonia C, the podcast where we dive into stories behind success, uncovering lessons learned and the insights gained by leaders and innovators in the business world. I'm your host, Sonia, and let's get started. Today's guest joining us is Peter Christian. Peter is a titan in the world of business consulting, an acclaimed author, and a speaker who has dedicated over 4 decades of helping companies transform into productive, efficient, and profitable entities. With a client roster of more than 300 companies across the United States and Europe, Peter's approach to business improvement is both unique and effective. Today, we'll explore his insights on navigating challenges and driving change in the business world. Today, I have Peter with us. Peter, I'm very excited to start our conversation today. How are you?
I am good. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation because you've done like a million different things. So, for our audience who doesn't know you or has never heard of you, can you tell us like a quick little brief of who you are and what you enjoy and what you do?
Sure. I worked in the corporate ranks for a while, got into consulting, worked with somebody for a few years, and then started my own practice with five other folks. Did that for 17 years and retired. And I always put that in quotes because people tell me I'm a very busy person for a retiree. At the end of 2018. Since then, I've been an author, a speaker on a variety of podcasts and other platforms. I teach project management. I'm going to be doing a series of webinars this year. So I'm staying pretty busy. And I have a lot of fun besides that, doing things like kayaking and going to shows and golf tournaments and things like that. So living a pretty busy life.
Very nice. I was actually just talking to someone the other day and he was telling me how like he's retired, but he's not because if he
Mhm.
really was retired, he'd be bored.
Yes. Well, retirement's not about just shutting down and doing nothing. It's kind of reaching out and trying some new things and, some of the things you really like to do, and you're not under any pressure. You do them when you want to do them and how you want to do them, and that.
Yeah.
So, anybody who just kind of lays in an easy chair and watches TV is really missing it.
Yeah. I also think that like with all your experience, you have so much to give the younger generation and they can, learn from you a lot.
If they're listening, I would hope so.
Do you work with any like younger entrepreneurs and founders to help them through that process?
Yeah, actually, I'm involved with a couple of universities up north, Rutgers University. I'm on a board, two boards up there, and I do some student mentoring and also some advice on projects and stuff. I teach at Alvernia University, and also get to deal with some of the students up there as well. So yeah, I am reaching out to students. It's a lot of fun, and by and large, they're pretty receptive. They want to learn, which is a
Yeah,
good thing.
of course. So let's get into you. You have 40 years of experience in the field of business consulting and a
Mhm.
track record of helping more than 300 companies across the United States and Europe. What
Yes.
was your inspiration in entering this field, and how have you maintained your passion and tenacity over the years?
Well, after I left the corporate world and I was looking for what my next thing was going to be, because I was still in my 40s, so I was pretty young. Person who was advising me said, a lot of the work that you've done in the corporate world has been in the area of consulting. You've been an internal consultant. How about being an external consultant? Now, I had that opportunity coming out of graduate school to go work for Price Waterhouse at the time, but I didn't feel that somebody coming right out of school really had the wherewithal to tell somebody with 20, 30 years of business experience what they should or shouldn't be doing.
Mhm.
So after having worked in the corporate world for about 20 years, I thought, I think I have enough that I can share now with people and a good experiences and track record and so forth. So that's what got me into the consulting practice, and I've kind of stayed with it since then. I still do a little bit of consulting on the side, and as I mentioned, with the teaching and the mentoring of students and that, I'm getting the point across to people and using my experience and knowledge to help them.
Yeah, so let's talk about this consulting a little bit. I know a lot of people that, feel like they have enough experience in the space or the industry that they're in, and they're like, oh, I want to become a consultant. I want to work for myself. I want to have the freedom to go to another country and work from there.
Yeah.
Well, first, my first question is, are those the facts? And the second one is like, that's technically entrepreneurship. You're building a business and working for yourself.
Right.
So how was that for you from going from, being an employee to starting your own practice? And what are all the things that you had to do to grow that?
Yeah. Well, to start with, yes. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who think either if they're not going to become insurance salesmen or car salesmen, they want to be consultants of one type or another. And that can be a disaster because not everybody's cut out for it. Okay. You are not the master of your own destiny. You've got clients who you need to work for and you need to keep happy and so forth. And you got to deal with them. Not everybody is capable of that, and you also have to have the knowledge in order to help them. You really need to be able to show them what they can and can't do, should be and shouldn't be doing, and so forth. Getting into it myself, as I thought more about what the person told me about having been an internal consultant, I realized, yeah, and I had always thought about it. So I waited for the right time and then took the opportunity. And it was helpful because I went back to one of my old schools that had a consulting group and started with them, and worked my way up from there to the point where I felt I was ready to take on my own enterprise, okay, and start my own consulting company. I wasn't quite ready at that point for a couple of reasons, one of them being family. My kids were kind of small. Consulting, definitely has obligations to it.
Mhm.
And I wanted to be able to spend time with my kids and help them, as they were growing and to be there for them. And once they were a little bit older, then I felt that I was at that point that I was ready to do that. Taking on that role, you now start your own company. Well, it's now yours. Okay, there's no safety net. Whatever decisions you make are yours, and you've got to live with them. And it's not just again working with clients, but you're also running an organization, so you got to worry about insurance and taxes and all sorts of things besides just going out and helping other people. And so it was an interesting balancing act for sure. So that was one of the key things I wanted, was to build an enterprise that would last beyond me. When I walked out the door, it just didn't fold. And unfortunately, I think sometimes people don't do that. And when they leave, the founder leaves, all of a sudden, whoever takes over isn't as interested and the company doesn't do as well.
Yeah. So when you started, when you went into consulting, it wasn't about you being a one-man shop and you're going to bring on clients and you're going to service them yourself. You always had the intention of, I'm going to build a consulting firm and I'm going to have people. How did you market yourself when you first started and getting out there?
As I had been looking at what I was going to do after I left the corporate world and getting into the consulting world, I had done a lot of networking. I probably had 600 contacts that I had made in like less than a year's time. So I reached back to those people because I knew that some of them needed help, okay, and could use somebody like myself and the folks involved in the organization I was involved with. So there were lots of different things that were helpful. And
Mhm.
you've always got to do that. You've got to pay attention to what's going around you, and you may not use something today or need something today, but you file it away. And down the road, when that time comes, then you draw from your memory banks about those things and go after them.
You've mentioned that rather than changing everything in a company, you
Mm.
focus on understanding what the company does well and identifying areas that need improvement. Can you share a challenging experience where this approach led to a significant turnaround for your client?
Well, first of all, I was not a turnaround type of consultant.
Hmm.
Okay. I tried to stay away from companies that were so bad that they were that close to closing the door. Because at that point, I think the time is almost up. Okay. They've gone through their resources, they're at wits' end, they probably slashed their employees, and the mood is just a bad thing. So I've always worked with companies that were doing okay but not great. They were kind of marching in place, and they couldn't kind of break that inertia and stuff. So that was a good thing. I've had a lot of success stories of companies that worked with and they took off. We had one, it was a small enterprise. The fellow was into processing apples, of all things, okay, for school lunch programs. The packages of apples that kids eat, or in grocery stores where you can get them as snack items. And he was at the point where he wanted to expand, but he wasn't quite sure how to. He was leasing his building and he wanted to get into his own. And we helped him to do that. And within, I would say, 2 years, he had grown almost tenfold, which is amazing. Okay. And all of a sudden, he just took off
Mm,
because he saw the opportunities. We gave him the foundation to work from and the confidence. And he took it from there and just went with it. And that's what a lot of people need to realize is, a consultant is there to help you, but they're not the end all do all. If the individual or the individuals who are involved with an enterprise don't pick up what the consulting is telling them and deal with it, they're not going to be successful. If they're relying on the consultant to make everything happen, consultants shouldn't be there forever.
mm.
Consultants there to help them to get over the hump, show them the right things to do, make sure they're doing it, and then back off and let them go ahead. And if they're not willing and able to do that, there's problems. And there are definitely some organizations and people who shouldn't be in business because they're just not ready to do that.
I think that when I started growing in my career and getting into building tech startups, one of the
Hmm.
biggest things that I was not prepared for was working with a team and managing a team. I,
Yes.
I found myself at one point where I was scared to say what I was thinking, express what I needed, because like now with the internet, people could just go online and bash you if they take something like the slightest wrong way, and even if that's not what you meant. So with all of your experience, what are some of the key strategies you've employed to build proper teams and teach um, founders and leaders how to build a team that's going to be productive and supportive? How do you build a team that's going to be there to support you and not cause you stress?
Right. I would say, first of all, find qualified people. People that have a variety of expertise, okay, in finance and technical, whether it's IT or engineering or whatever the case may be, the kind of folks you're going to need to do whatever it is you're going to do. If it's a company that's building products, to be able to handle all those different things. If it's consulting in a variety of different areas, whatever the case may be. But get that expertise. If you think you're going to be the expert on everything, you are sadly mistaken, okay? Because then you don't have a team. All
Yeah.
right, because a team is really, and we see it all. I mean, we always look at sports as a team. The coach isn't out there throwing passes. He's not blocking, running, punting, shooting baskets, whatever the case the sport is. He is helping individuals to succeed at what they're doing and then to function with the other people that they're dealing with as a team. Okay, and each person has his or her function on the team, and they need to interplay with each other. And the same is true in business. So that then teaching them to work together. Okay, while the client, the person who's paying the bill and you're doing the work for, is the person you want to satisfy. Quite honestly, your team members are clients too. The work you do that you pass along to them has to be in good shape and satisfactory so they can take it and do what they need to do with it. And it needs to be done on a timely basis and so forth. So you need to have people who understand that,
Mhm.
because a lot of times people, they're used to dealing on their own and they don't have to worry about everybody else. They do their thing and they pass it on. They don't worry about, not as a team member. Okay, you have to be cognizant of the people that you're dealing with and what their needs are and how you have to provide that to them. And you also have to own up when you're making a mistake and get it straightened out. Okay. You don't just pass it on and let the next person have to worry about it. Then that's not teamwork. Okay.
Yeah.
That's individualism and that's a problem. And when they own it, when they understand what you're trying to do, what they need to do, what their parts are, and doing them, turn them loose. Don't over manage them. Okay. And there are too many people who do that. They need to know
Mm.
every little nit and nab. No, you don't. As a manager, you don't need to know that. You need to know the big picture and need to know some of the details, but you don't need to know all of the details. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where you need to trust your people. You do those things and you should be successful. Now, you're always going to have the problem child, right? We always do. And you got to learn to deal with them, but you also have to recognize that they're given an opportunity in order to succeed, and you allow that to go for so long. And if they don't get it, then sometimes you have to make that hard decision, and you have to let the person go
Yeah.
because they're just not fitting in. Okay, I see too many times where people make excuses for individuals and they keep them on and they continue to cause problems and headaches and so forth. Nobody goes to work looking to do headaches all the time. They look to make advancements and to make changes, realizing you're going to be bumps in the road and you got to deal with it. But you don't look forward to it and you don't encourage it. You just deal with it when it happens. So I think if you do those things, okay, then I think you're in a pretty good stead.
So maybe you can give me some advice on this. Do you how do you put some sense of urgency on your team? Meaning, you know, yes, it's a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday job, but there are times when all hell breaks loose and you just want to see your team like, not, you know, checking out at 4:30 or not showing that sense of, hey, there's a critical issue. I need my team to feel the same sense that I'm feeling. And I guess entrepreneurs and founders are a little different because it's their baby, they're starting up and their sense of urgency is critical. But is there a way to get your team to maybe not feel exactly the same way as you do, but to support you and also have that sense of urgency?
Yeah, not everything is an emergency. If everything's an emergency, then first of all, you're not doing things right.
Hmm.
Okay. Because it shouldn't be. And if everything's an emergency, people are going to look at you and go, he really doesn't know what he's talking about, or he doesn't
Yeah.
know what he's doing. So you start off with what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Okay. And everybody understands that. Okay. What's the end result that we want? Okay. And what's the time frame that we're talking about? Then the next piece is the individual. Okay, what's each person's role in this? What do you need to do, and you, and you, and you, and how do they interact with each other? Okay, and what's it going to take you? You don't just tell them, well, you've got 10 hours to do this. You ask them, how long are you going to need? All right,
Mm.
and you can question it. All right, I had a vice president when I was working in the corporate, and he said, I need such and such and such and such and such. And I said, okay, when do you need it by? And he said, oh, in a week. He says, now I don't want you to spend a lot of time on it. Well, he just told me he needed it in a week. If I
Yeah.
take 40 hours or 50 hours to do it and he gets it in a week, does it matter how much time I took as long as I give it to him in the time frame that he asked for? So I said to him, that's not your concern how long it takes me. If it takes me 10 minutes, it'll take me 10 minutes. If it takes me 10 hours, it'll take me 10 hours. I will get it done and you will have it on time. And that's what you expect from your individuals. Now,
Hmm.
once they establish a budget, they should live by it. Okay. And I was always strong with my teams on that. Okay. About staying within their budget. Most companies will allow like a 10% overrun on stuff. I gave them 2%.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was 2% above and 2% below. Because what I said to them is, I really want you to think about what it is that you have to do and how you're going to go about doing it.
Mm.
Okay. And 2% should get you pretty darn close. Now, on occasion, you're going to slip. Okay. And maybe it's 5 or 10%. Okay. But I said to them, if you overspend, guess what? That's money that you have taken away from something else that could be done. Okay. Or you're tying it up. Okay. And by the time it frees up, you may not be able to do the other things that you wanted to. So I was very strong with that. And guess what? We did it. They pulled it off because they understood. and they
Mm,
treated it like it was their money, okay? And they were spending their money. And when you spend your money, you're a lot more careful with it than you're spending somebody else's
yeah.
money. So that kind of thing. And you instilled in them what they needed to do. And then, like I said, you let them go and do it. Now, you keep an eye on them, all right? And you remind them. And if somebody's falling short, you certainly let them know and you say, how can I help you? Again, not what can I do for you, but how can I help you? Okay, to get through whatever it is you need to get through, or what problems are you having so we can get that resolved. You are kind of the blocker and the tackler for them to get the nonsense out of the way so they can focus on the job that they need to do.
Mm,
And when things change or a problem crops up, you don't let it fester. You get everybody together and you say, hey, guess what? This is what's happening. Now, what are we going to do to resolve it? In fact, if you're a good manager, you've probably had some discussions before about possibilities of things that could go wrong. So you're kind of ready for them if they do, and you got to kind of get a game plan in place as to what you're going to do if that happens. Now, if it doesn't, great. But if it doesn't catch you by surprise, like, oh my God, I had this one woman. She came from that organization that provided the funding. And whenever we would have a problem, and believe me, if anybody works with projects and says, I've never had a problem, they always go so smoothly and no, they're lying. They're lying. I have yet to see a project that hasn't had a problem or
yeah.
multiple, okay, that you have to resolve. And she acted like it was the end of the world and this never happened before. And what were we going to do? And I said, we're going to handle it. Well, how can you be so calm about it? Because I've been through this like a
Um,
million times, so you get used. I said, if I let everything drive me crazy, I'd be in an insane asylum. So you just go, okay, we got to deal with it. What are we going to do? Let everybody know, and then you move on.
yeah.
But you communicate well with people so that they know what's going on, okay? And there are no surprises. And similarly, they're communicating with you. Communication goes two ways. It's not just the manager communicating to the individuals on the team. It's the team members feeding back to the manager to let him or her know what's going on. And if you have that communication, great. I had a group when I was in the corporate world, okay, of 5 or 6 people, and I started off. We would have a monthly meeting, and I would start off, here's what we've been doing, and da, 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 da. By the third meeting, I didn't say a word. The person who was in charge of customer service, who took the orders for the products and so forth, he led the meeting and he said, here's what's going on, here's the expectations, and here's how we're doing, and that. And we went to the next and the next and the next, and the whole meeting got taken care of, and I didn't have to say a word. Can you imagine a team like that where you
Mm.
don't have to say a word? They know what's expected. They know what they need to do. They're talking about, well, you owe me this, and I need that, and I'll get you this. And I would just walk out of there. It was like they got it.
I see this quite a bit. What happens when your team has cultural differences to you and
Mm.
they look at the person in leadership or the boss,
Hmm.
and everything that the boss says or does, they're like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Like the leader can do no wrong.
Mm.
And everything, even if the leader gives some advice on go do this, you're gonna have these results, and they know that's not what's gonna happen, they won't speak up because either there's a cultural difference in leadership scale or they're scared. And I see this all the time, even online platforms where people leave companies and they're talking about the CEO or the founder, and they're like, they were a yes ma'am person, and when you're having conversations with them, they wanted to hear yes to everything that they were doing. How do you build a culture that's build on, obviously respect, but also letting the team know that like you're open to speak your mind, and if your leader or your manager or your director says something that or you think is not the right way to go about it or whatever, how can you feel comfortable in communicating that?
Encouragement and feedback on a regular basis, okay, and kind of learning lessons
Mm,
and realizing, yes, do come from at it from things from a different point of view, a different way than I do. In fact, everybody should. You don't want robots, okay? You don't need managers to run robots. Robots just kind of,
I agree
uh,
100%.
yeah. So you want to have that difference of opinion, but you also encourage them to speak up.
Mm,
All right, but not in a demeaning way, or not in an "I told you" way, or you're full of whatever
yeah.
way, but I respectfully, and I hate that word sometimes because I know what respectfully means. Okay, I think we all do. Okay, I disagree with that, and I think there's a better way to do it, or I can see a problem if we follow this course. So bring it out and let's talk about it. All
Hmm.
right, don't hold it back. The last thing you want to find out is towards the end of the project, it falls apart, and they go, "Well, I knew that was going to happen." It was like, and you didn't bother to tell us?
Yeah.
Like, really? And you haven't succeeded as a manager. Okay. In fact, in meetings, I would go around, and the first person I would call on was always the quietest person.
Mm,
Okay. The person that would usually speak the least, because I wanted that person to get his or her opinion in, or, whatever it was first before they got drowned out by everybody when, oh, well, I'm not going to offer mine now because no, and get them all out on the table, and then we would discuss them, and we would pick the one that made the most sense. And sometimes it was different than what I had said. All right, and that was perfectly okay. Again, like I said, get smart people. When you got smart people, they should be telling you smart things. Okay, and then we would explain to the rest why we had chosen that versus the other. And it wasn't because their idea was bad, but this one just seemed to be better. And that's what we would go with. And again, we would get buy-in and we would move ahead. In early experiences, I had a manager who let me do a lot of things, and
yeah.
he gave me a lot of leash to do it. And sometimes he knew that I might not succeed all that much, but I learned from it, because just telling somebody, no, you can't do that, and then cutting it off, well, guess what? Unless they can prove it to themselves, they're not going to believe that couldn't be done or it shouldn't be done. But if you give them enough rope to try it and they see for themselves and they go, and you don't rub it in on them like, see, I
Yeah.
told you so. Okay. They find out for themselves. It's a learning experience.
So your book, What
Mhm.
About the Vermin Problem, has been
Yes.
an Amazon bestseller, and you're finishing up your second book on professional influences and influencers. So what motivates you to write, and how do you hope your book will influence current and future business leaders?
Okay, being in the business world, we run across all sorts of strange instances and characters and things, okay? And I certainly did. And I kept saying to people I worked with, someday that's going to be in our book. As I said, well, wound up being mine because by then, but anyway. And I kept those things in mind. So when I retired, again, I'll put the quotes on it. I said, I've never written that book. Maybe now is the time to, because I got some time. I don't have, deadlines and all that stuff. So I did. And it was 12 instances that I had that were pretty memorable
Mm-hmm.
in a variety of areas in business, dealing with uh, honesty and relationships and things along those lines, communication. Okay, and I wrote the stories and then tried to piece it together, and that's where I had somebody who helped me, who said, well, what are the ties between these stories, and let's get them into segments, which we did. And we appropriated from Clint Eastwood and called them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they weren't because they by themselves were good, but because what the people we worked with were good and did good, or they didn't do good, they did bad things or ugly things, and it caused problems. And the moral was to individuals. There was a fine line between being good or being ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all in the decisions that were made and the actions that were taken. And if they had taken a different tack, they could have been very successful, but they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what about the vermin problem, was one of those instances about communication, where the communication from the client to us was poor. And by the time we got done, the project kind of fell on its face because they didn't communicate properly. Okay. And it took them a long time then to get through the work that they needed to that they were paying us for and that they needed to get done because of their poor communication. Okay. And yet, if they had communicated properly, it probably all would have worked out just fine. So it was a book to one, get some things off my chest, and two, I think as a help to people that are out in the world that run into similar circumstances and go, huh, how do I deal with that? And I hear a lot of that from people. And it's through the influences that we have and influencers that we have throughout our lives, both personally and professionally, and what those impacts are and what we take away from it. And again, there's a variety of things that we can do and people we can listen to and things that we can either deal with or not deal with. And that influences how we think and how we act. But the key there is don't get to a point and say, okay, I know everything I need to know. I don't need to know anything else.
Mm.
As long as you're living, as long as you're drawing a breath, you should be learning every day something new. To realize that, give homage to the people who've helped you because they have influenced you and helped you a lot in your career. And we get lots of help, whether we want to recognize it or not. And we should thank those folks for it. And we should pass it on.
Funny you're mentioning that. I was talking to someone about this exactly yesterday. I have a couple of mentors, and I think that's like one of the best things I ever did was I would go to a lot of networking events and I would find these people that I would have conversations with, and I'd be like, would you like to be my mentor? And I would just ask, right? And like, what's the worst they can do is say no. And I found like two really good mentors that are still in my life. And sometimes we have a conversation for an hour where it's me just venting. But I found that they've enriched my life so much. They've been there, they've done it, and that's sort of like what also inspired me to start this podcast was, learning from the people who have been in the trenches and learned. And like I think there's so much knowledge in the world that needs to be passed on, and people have to be willing to learn. And to your point, I said this to someone yesterday, which was like, you stop learning the day you die. If you stop learning while you're alive, you're like a zombie walking around, right? You have to
Yep.
be always learning. And I think the most important point is you have to be open to learn,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we're reaching our time for today, but before we wrap up, I want to just sort of ask you one last question, which is what advice would you give to aspiring consultants or business executives on cultivating tenacity, navigating challenges, and achieving long-term success in their careers?
If you firmly believe in something, you should never let anybody convince you otherwise and talk you out of doing it. You look at a lot of the great inventions, a lot of the great companies that were started, and you look at the individuals, and a lot of them failed multiple times and had people who went, just, do something else, go get a regular job. And they were tenacious. They said, no, I might have failed this way, but there's a different way, and I will find it. Like Edison said, with inventing the light bulb, and they said, how how did you put up with failing 999 times? And he said, I didn't fail. I just learned 999 ways not to do it
Yeah,
until I found the one that I did. Could you
yeah,
imagine if he had given up?
yeah,
We'd probably still be dealing with candles and kerosene lamps and stuff like that.
yeah.
So people like that who are tenacious, who say, no, I know what's right and I know it's there. I might not have picked the right path, but I got pretty darn close. And if I just keep up at it, it'll happen someday. And it did. So be tenacious about it. Now, you also have to realize when you're going down a wrong path that maybe you need to take a slightly different path. All
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you gave up on it or what you did was wrong. It just means you learned something again. We talked about that a little bit before. People don't like to talk about their failures. Well, guess what? You learn more probably from the failures than you do from the good things. Okay.
Sure.
And you learn not to repeat the bad things, because if you do, then you haven't learned very much. So I would say that would be my big thing to folks that are starting out.
Mhm.
And then the day will come and everything will be like, and you go, I am so glad I did.
Hey, that's awesome. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you again for having me.
fun. And yeah, this was so insightful. I'm sure our listeners are really going to enjoy it, Peter. And
Good.
so thank you.
Thank you again.
And that's a wrap. I want to extend a huge thank you to Peter for joining us today and sharing such valuable insights and stories from his remarkable journey. To our listeners, thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery and inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and join our community on social media. I would love to hear from you. Leave a review and tell me what topics you'd like me to explore in future episodes. Remember, the future belongs to those who embrace change and innovation with tenacity. Keep striving, keep innovating, and most importantly, stay tenacious in your pursuits. Thank you for tuning in. I look forward to bringing you more inspiring conversations in our upcoming episodes. This is Sonia signing off, but as always, remember to chase your dreams with tenacity.